A week after the details of the Pentagon's new Asia-Pacific strategy were laid out, reports appeared that the U.S. is going to reopen 2 of its former bases in the Philippines. The bulk of America's warships will be permanently deployed to the region by 2020. Let's now cross live to Manila to discuss the issue with Renato Reyes, Secretary General of the Bayan political coalition, which opposes U.S. presence in the area. Thank you for being with us today. Now, the locations once acted as major hubs for military operations for U.S. forces in the Pacific. What role are they now going to play?
Well, in line with the U.S. strategy of rebalancing their forces, the U.S. is seeking more access to these former bases. Though they may not be going after formal basing agreements, they would have unlimited access to these facilities and many other facilities all over the country so that their ships can stop over, refuel, and be stationed for periods, especially during military exercises. And all of these would transform the Philippines into a military outpost that would allow the United States to project its power throughout Southeast Asia. So this is a very bad development as far as we're concerned. 20 years after the U.S. bases were shut down, it seems that the bases are back, although not a formal basing agreement, but just the same, the functions are there. The functions of a military base are there.
Now, Mr. Reyes, we know that China has clashed with the Philippines on a number of occasions in the South China Sea, and Beijing is unlikely to be happy with this news. What reaction can we expect? Do you think we could see a Filipino-China conflict sort of boil over?
Well, definitely the increased presence of U.S. troops would complicate matters between the Philippines and China. It won't stabilize the situation. It might be seen as provocative action. It might spark some kind of arms race in the South China Sea with the growing number of U.S. warships entering the country. So this is something that the United States has sought to exploit over the past few months, seeing that the Philippines is weak when pitted against China. The U.S. is now promising some kind of support for the armed forces modernization, creating a so-called minimum credible defense posture. But the end result would be more in favor of the U.S. than in the Philippines. Given these arrangements, it's the U.S. which is really exploiting and benefiting from this territorial dispute, and at the end of the day, the Philippines would be on the losing end if tensions rise between China and diplomatic venues for resolving the conflict are set aside in favor of an arms buildup in the South China Sea.
Now, in one of your interviews, you said that the Philippines is de facto hosting U.S. warships, presumably armed with nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. Why the need for such a devastating capability?
Well, the U.S. wants full-spectrum dominance in the region, and it wants to project its military power to everyone concerned, especially China. And under certain agreements with the United States, the Philippines cannot really ascertain whether these warships are carrying weapons of mass destruction or not. The Philippines, explicitly in its constitution, has adopted a nuclear-free policy. It is against the entry of nuclear weapons in our country, but based on the secrecy being used by the United States, we can never tell if we are hosting warships with nuclear capability. It has been done in the past during the period of the U.S. military bases. The U.S. has admitted that it had stored nuclear weapons in its former bases. Now, it might be doing the same thing again in the guise of visiting ships that are being used to project military power throughout the region.
Now, very briefly, we are running out of time. You have bases in Japan and South Korea, troops in Australia, and joint military exercises in the region. Now, China's looking increasingly surrounded by Washington. Is the U.S. seeking to provoke China on purpose?
I think the U.S. may not be headed for a direct military confrontation with China at the moment, but the U.S. wants to contain China, wants to encircle China and keep it subservient to U.S. dictates. Seeing that the U.S. has so many economic and business interests in China, it wants to keep China obedient to whatever dictates that the U.S. has in store for China. So all the treaty allies from Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, they're being mobilized right now to encircle China and keep it subservient to U.S. dictates and interests.
All right. Renato Reyes, Secretary General of the Bayan Coalition, which opposes U.S. presence in the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much.